Okay, so the book of Acts, chapter 20. It's story time. All right, ready to go? Okay, here we go. So after the furor had died down, where was this furor happening? Are you thinking the Führer? Not the Führer. Not Hitler. Der Führer. I'm talking the Führer. What was the Führer? Do you guys remember from chapter 21? It was only a week ago. Mike said, hey, I listened to the message last week. It was good. I'm like, I don't remember anything, man. It was a long week. Where was it?
I hadn't heard about the Holy Spirit.
Oh, yes, in Ephesus. And there was a big... almost the whole city turned out to their local agora or whatever. It turned into quite a conundrum. Okay, so the furor dies down, and Shaul sent for the disciples and encouraged them, and then took his leave and set out on his way to Macedonia. He went through that area, and after saying much to encourage them, he passed on to Greece, where he spent 3 months. As he was preparing to set sail for Syria, he discovered a plot against him by the unbelieving Jews. So he changed his mind and decided to return by way of Macedonia. Sopater from Berea, the son of Pyrrhus, accompanied him, as did Aristarchus and Secundus from Thessalonica, Gaius from Derbe, Timothy and Tychicus, and Trophimus from the province of Asia. These men went on and waited for us in Troas, while we sailed from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread. 5 days later, we met them in Troas, where we spent a week on Motzei Shabbat, or your translation undoubtedly says something different. When we were gathered to break bread, Shaul was addressing them, and since he was going to leave the next day, he kept talking until midnight. Now, there were many oil lamps burning in the upstairs room where we were meeting, and there was a young fellow named Eutychus sitting on the windowsill. Pay attention, Derek. As Shaul's drash went on and on, Eutychus grew sleepier and sleepier, until finally he went sound asleep and fell from the 3rd story to the ground. When they picked him up, he was dead. But Shaul, I'm sorry, Derek.
Is he fading out on you?
He used to every once in a while. It's an inside joke. I'm sorry, buddy. I just had to say that. So Shaul went down and threw himself onto him and put his arms around him and said, "Don't be upset. He's alive." Then they went back upstairs and broke bread and ate. And he continued talking with them until daylight and then left. So, greatly relieved, they brought the boy home alive, and we went on ahead to the ship and set sail for Assos, where we were planning to take Shaul aboard. He had arranged this because he wanted to go there by land. After he met us at Assos, we took him aboard and went on to Milet. The next day we sailed from there and arrived off of Chios, and the following day we crossed over to Samos, and the day after that we reached Miletus. For Shaul had decided to bypass Ephesus on his voyage in order to avoid losing time in the province of Asia, because he was hurrying to get to Jerusalem, if possible, to celebrate Shavuot, Pentecost. But he did send from Miletus to Ephesus, summoning the elders of the Messianic community from Ephesus. And when they arrived, he said to them, "You yourselves know how from the first day I set foot in the province of Asia, I was with you the whole time, serving the Lord with much humility and with tears, in spite of the tests I had to undergo because of the plots of the unbelieving Jews. You know that I held nothing back that could be helpful to you, and that I taught you both in public and from house to house, declaring with utmost seriousness the same message to Jews and Greeks alike. Turn from sin to God, and put your trust in our Lord, Yeshua the Messiah. And now, compelled by the Spirit, I am going to Jerusalem. I don't know what will happen to me there, other than in every city the Ruach HaKodesh keeps warning me that imprisonment and persecution await me. But I consider my own life of no importance to me whatsoever, as long as I can finish the course ahead of me, the task I received from the Lord, Yeshua, to declare in depth the good news of God's love and kindness. Now listen, I know that none of you people among whom I have gone about proclaiming the kingdom will ever see me again. Therefore I testify on this day that I am innocent of the blood of all. For I did not shrink from proclaiming to you the whole plan of God. Watch out for yourselves and for all the flock in which the Holy Spirit has placed you as leaders, to shepherd God's Messianic community, which he won for himself at the cost of his own Son's blood. I know that after I leave, savage wolves will come in among you, and they won't spare the flock. Even from among your own number, men will arise and teach perversions of the truth in order to drag away the disciples after themselves. So stay alert. Remember that for 3 years, night and day, with tears in my eyes, I never stopped warning you. And now I entrust you to the care of the Lord and to the message of his love and kindness, for it can build you up, and give you an inheritance among all those who have been set apart for God. I have not wanted for myself anyone's silver or gold or clothing. You yourselves know that these hands of mine have provided for my own needs, not only my own needs, but the needs of my co-workers as well. In everything I have given you an example of how by working hard like this you must help the weak, remembering the words of the Lord Yeshua himself, saying, there is more happiness in giving than in receiving. When he had finished speaking, Shaul knelt down with them all and prayed. They were all in tears as they threw their arms around his neck and kissed him farewell. What saddened them the most was his remark that they would never see him again. Then they accompanied him to the ship. That's a challenging section. It really is a challenging section. So I want to just walk you through this a little bit, and there's going to be some, I think, intense discussion tonight about a few key issues, I think. Zealotry, truth, and sleeping in church. You hear that, Larry?
I try to stay up for that sleeping in church.
Man, that happened all the time when I was a kid, man. There was always some old guy in the front who was
Snoring and drooling.
nodding off. No, it's okay. It happens, man. Don't fear not. Just if you snore, the person next to you will hit you a little bit. So now, I want to deal first of all with verse 3, where it says that he discovered a plot by the Jews. Now, this is interesting. So I want to ask you this question. Why are the unbelieving Jews plotting against Paul?
And I would also ask, who are the unbelieving Jews? Because you find his adversaries mentioned elsewhere to be Judaizers.
Okay.
So it makes me wonder, what type of unbelieving Jews are these? What
Okay.
sect are they? What kind of disagreement is it?
Yeah, I don't know that, I think based on our previous discussions that I wouldn't necessarily identify a sect as much as I would identify a group within that sect that he calls the circumcision faction, which is what has been identified so far.
Jews.
Yes, they are.
Circumcision of the
They are.
Jews.
Well,
It
they're...
makes me wonder, are these certain men come from James?
No, I don't believe so. I don't believe it's that faction. I think it's just the unbelieving Jews of the synagogue system throughout the Roman Empire. Huh?
And the temple.
And the temple, yeah. There are plenty of the Jews. Well, I think that we can assume that there's a majority of the Jews who did not believe and are challenging Paul. But the key question here is, why are the unbelieving Jews trying to kill him? Tracy?
Well, I was just going to say, a reference to who they are is in Ezekiel. He's talking about these wolves
Yeah.
that are amongst us. And this is a quote from Ezekiel 22.
Yep.
And it's talking about her priests, and these are the priests in Jerusalem, just like the ones that were in Messiah's time when they crucified us. I think we're speaking of the same leaders in Jerusalem. The
Sure.
priests and what.
Sure.
And their priests had violated the Torah, profaned the holy things, and then in verse 27, it says, her princes in the midst are like wolves ravening the prey to shed blood and to destroy souls. Talks about them oppressing widows and whatnot. And I think you just talked about that a little bit too, about oppressing the weak or something like that.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Keith, and then Mike.
Well, we know when Paul first started in this, he was hell-bent on taking out Messianic believers.
Mm-hmm. Seems like somebody who, just like Paul, has stepped up to take his place.
Right.
He's fighting against himself.
There's people like him with that zeal thinking they're doing it for God.
Yeah.
And now he's on the wrong side as far as they're concerned.
Right.
And who knows, like, just like Paul can send letters, I don't know what the temple has through the synagogues that they're looking for Paul because they're not too happy with him.
Sure. And it's indeterminate whether this is emissaries that are, I don't mean emissaries as in apostles, I mean people who are sent from the Sanhedrin out into the Roman Empire, into the synagogue system, somebody just like Paul who was sent out to rally the troops and find these people and root them out. Or if it was just natural indignation and hatred without a cause that was rising up within the community of Jews themselves. I'm not sure. Mike, and then, go ahead, Mikey. I apologize.
So, in two spots, your translation said unbelieving Jews.
Yep.
And I'm sure there were, but I don't see that word unbelieving.
No, it doesn't, and I thank you for pointing that out. Remember that I'm reading from the complete Jewish Bible, and it is trying to paint a picture. It's not an awesome translation. It's not a terribly accurate translation as far as word for word, but I think it serves our purposes to try to keep things straight in our minds, but it doesn't always do the best case in trying to give you a most accurate translation, and I thank you for pointing that out, because in most translations, in the actual literal original text, it's just going to say the Jews were plotting against him. But I think this Bible is trying to help out by saying, hey, it's the unbelieving Jews. It's not just the Jews at large that are trying to kill him. So thank you for pointing that out, Mikey. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Paul was not a small potato. He was a big deal.
Yeah.
And he was respected, and like, that guy's doing it right. And then when he went against what they thought was the status, normal.
Yeah. Orthodoxy.
Friends make the best enemies.
Sure.
And these people, some of them were angry.
Yeah.
I mean,
And I think that's
really,
the question that I have here, it's curious that none of you have actually addressed the question that I asked, which is why? Why do they want to kill him? Not who wants to kill him, but why do they want to kill him?
This is great.
Because they think he's teaching something other than the Torah. The circumcision problem.
Okay, Angela?
He's teaching something other than the other stuff, not Torah. Other stuff.
Okay. And I don't know if you're aware of this, you probably are, but you can look right in Acts 21, which is the very next chapter. It will tell you precisely why these people want to kill him. Acts chapter 21, verse 21 will tell you clearly. Tracy?
I was just going to say, this might be the simple answer, but they hated me, they will hate you. They tried to kill Messiah, they're trying to kill my prophets. It's just the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, the curious thing for me is, this is the question that I had for myself and I have for you, is, are these just murderers running around just because they're angry and they're ready to kill someone? I mean, is that what's happening here?
Those who kill you think they're doing so for God.
That's why I put that reference right there in John 16, which is exactly what Yeshua said. There's coming a day when the people who are killing you are thinking they're doing God a service. Now, and I think this is an exact fulfillment of that prophecy of the Messiah saying, the day is coming when everyone who is killing you is think he's doing a service to God. What is the service to God that they think they're doing? Are they following the Torah in trying to kill him? Yes, they are. That's exactly right. They are, according to their own minds, following the Torah. What Torah commandment are they following in trying to kill Paul? What's he guilty of? According to the Torah, what is Paul guilty of if the rumors are true? Angela?
Well, I don't know that he's guilty of this, but it's in that verse you just talked about. It says that he's telling the Jews to forsake Moses and not circumcise their children, or to walk according to the custom.
That's correct.
Tracy just quoted. That argument could be waylaid. He's profaning the. That verse you just read listed out those things that the ravening rules.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Prophet.
Yes, and I think, I'm looking at Deuteronomy 13 as well. However, I know it has been interpreted this way in some cases where it's like, because everything in Deuteronomy says if a prophet or a dreamer of dreams or some town decides to follow other gods, it doesn't specifically say teaching strange doctrines or trying to change the rules around. It says leading you after false gods. Now, I know that the Jews have interpreted that to be, and we have heard it said, if someone comes along and is a false prophet who is teaching things that go against the Torah of Moses, then they are a false prophet. And therefore the stoning death penalty still applies to them. And I think there's a valid reason, there's a valid argument to be made there. That is a potential reason why they're trying to kill Paul. Another one is blasphemy. That one's really challenging because you'll never find a solid definition for what blasphemy is. Kent?
Now, I do have a question. Now, to follow the law, now he's in Tyre. Is that in Israel itself?
Who?
Now, when he's being attacked in this manner by these circumcised, probably whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
Was he in Israel? He's in Tyre, so...
Oh, yeah. Well, at this time, no. But when he gets to Jerusalem in chapter 21, yes, he'll be in the land of Israel.
Okay, so they can actually stone him, because outside they couldn't do
Well,
it.
they did stone him. Remember, it wasn't long ago, and I don't remember which town he was in. They actually stoned him and drug him outside the city. And so there is a hierarchy of authority inside the synagogue. The synagogue officers have the ability to do punishment. That was what Paul was doing when he got letters of authority from the chief priest to go and do that. He has legal authority to conduct discipline, if you want to call it that, within the family of God.
I think that was just an organic explosion. I don't think they had a trial.
For whom?
For Paul.
For Paul?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think they just said, kill him, They just went berserk.
Yeah.
And they could probably say when Phineas killed that,
that was a...
spear and killed the guy that was fooling around with the Moabite.
Yeah.
He's like, they could claim that as there wasn't a trial there. He got just
That's true.
dealt with.
That's true. I think that we're often left with that impression when we read the book of Acts, like with the stoning of Stephen and dragging Paul outside the city and killing him, that this is just some kind of spontaneous mob violence lynching. And it certainly could be. I wouldn't naturally assume that. I would say, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they did converse amongst themselves and decide that somebody needed to die. You would at least hope so. But it's certainly possible that that was just a mob action. I would hope not, because that's not Torah justice. You don't conduct justice that way.
Last thought is that the Roman Empire was actually saving him, but it created this pressure because they felt we have got to deal with this guy the way the Torah says. But if we go through the proper channels, Rome's going to find out, and Roman law is going to confound our ability to be good Jews and kill this guy.
Yeah, that's certainly possible, Mikey.
The second part of Deuteronomy 15 talks about that dreamer of dreams,
Right.
speaking apostasies and coming away from the path.
Right. Yep.
I don't think it's just about the
Yeah.
idolatry.
Yeah, I don't either. I think there's some hints and some things you can pick up in there. I don't think it's for no reason that the Jews have interpreted that way. And I think most Messianics have actually, whenever a Messianic that I'm aware of quotes Deuteronomy 13, that's what they're talking about, is somebody leading you away from the path. That's a false prophet, and they should be stoned. So the key takeaway here is exactly what Yeshua said in John chapter 16. They think they're doing the will of God. They think they're right. They're not just murderers who are seeking to kill this guy unjustly. It's unjust because we know the truth, but they think they're doing what's right. Now, the key question here that comes next is Paul a blasphemer, and where did this charge of blasphemy come from? Where are these rumors coming from? We know that in Acts chapter 21, verse 21, it says, brother, that they have heard about you, that you do this and that and this and that. Where are these things coming from? These are just rumors.
Well, obviously, I think I have a long list. But one of the easy ways would be if you look in Revelation and you look at the word to the churches. One of the churches is criticized for accepting the doctrine of eating food sacrificed
to idols, yeah.
So, what's fascinating in this passage is we find two instances, it appears, of Paul trying to keep some holy days. He stays somewhere for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. He's trying to get to Jerusalem for something.
Right.
And yet there is a passage, I don't remember which one of the epistles it is, where he says there is no regard of any holy day. And anybody who is regarding days more important than others should be ashamed of themselves.
Yes, and I totally understand what you're saying, and that is one of those misunderstood passages, which I think I would remind you, that is in Corinthians.
Right, and this is an example of maybe being misunderstood. Because
Yeah, absolutely.
Trying to take part in
Absolutely.
these holy
And
days.
if he's talking to Gentiles in Corinth, what holy days is he talking about?
He's
Certainly
talking
not
about the holy days that they were doing.
the pagan holy
Pagan
days.
holy days.
Don't let anybody judge you in regards to pagan holy days. It doesn't say, it doesn't say the Lord's holy days. So
That's an
but
example of something that could be interpreted.
yes, there are, and it shouldn't be any surprise to us that Paul is being misinterpreted. In those days, Peter said it himself, and here we are still dealing with it today. I mean, if frankly what most of the church thinks about Paul is true, he is a blasphemer and deserves to be stoned to death, according to the Torah of Moses.
That's Old Testament.
What's that?
That's Old Testament.
That's Old Testament, and that's what? That's a great point. That's a great point, Nathan. And I'm gonna bring that up again in a minute. Who else had their hand raised? Was that you, Mikey? Did you want to say something? Okay, I apologize. It was you. Okay, I apologize.
What we see today is that he's
Yeah.
be blaspheming for what people think he's saying.
That's correct. That is absolutely correct. And I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but have you heard the new perspective on Paul? You guys aware of this scholarship?
What
I may have
I've
heard
heard
of it.
many.
What is it?
No, it's not something new necessarily. It's been around for about 10 years. That some of the world's leading biblical scholars have. If you've not heard of the New Pauline perspective, none of you.
Well, I don't know.
Okay, no, that's okay.
I don't want it to seem like I'm.
No, it's okay. Paul is obviously confusing. So there are three guys, I don't remember, but if you look up the new perspective on Paul, you'll see this. You just do a Google search. There are like 5 or 6 top guys who are, with multiple degrees from all different kind of universities, who over the last 10 years have been doing copious research trying to figure out, why do we have so much trouble with Paul? What's the problem? Why does he seem to be confusing people? And why does he seem to contradict himself? And what's going on? They've been publishing like thousands of pages of volumes of commentary on the Bible, specifically on Paul's writings, and they have begun to look at Paul from a Hebrew roots perspective. It has really blown up in academic circles. Now, here's the thing. They are not willing to go that far. They are not willing to say, wait a minute, they are willing to say we have a thorough misunderstanding of Paul, but they are not willing to go the full length because their academic careers will be over. They're not willing to go that far. But what they are willing to say is, if we're going to make sense out of Paul, we have to put him in his first century Judaism context, or he becomes thoroughly confusing. And so they're starting to hint around the edges of that and look at Paul from that perspective. But they are, like I said, not willing to go that far. So some of the Bible's leading scholarship teams around the world are starting to look at that. But like I said, they're not willing to go that far. But it's fascinating, and they're learning some amazing things, and it's starting to all click and come together for them. And I think that these guys know it. They know what's going on, but they won't and they can't publish it because they'll lose their academic credentials. They will lose their livelihoods.
What do you mean with go that far? How far?
How far? To say that the Torah is still valid and we have had a horrible misunderstanding of Paul and have been mischaracterizing him for 1900 years? Reversing Constantine, reversing church doctrine, the Catholic Church doctrines going back to 250 AD. I think they're starting to, if you read their writings, you know it. You can sense it, especially if you're coming from our perspective. You're like, my gosh, I can't believe these guys are actually figuring this stuff out. But it's so frustrating that they're right on the cusp and they're just not willing to take that one additional step. They're making really veiled comments like, this is fascinating, and maybe it desires more research, this kind of stuff, but they're not drawing any conclusions.
Brad Scott he was a pastor in the Lutheran church, and he started seeing this, and he came out of that, and now he does, like he has done, a one-man play being Paul.
I have seen that.
And talking like, this is what I meant.
Yeah. I think that's a great idea, and I used to do that when I was teaching history. I didn't dress up, but I just played one of the historical characters and had the kids ask me questions. But you really have to know your stuff if you're going to do that. It was a good experiment, but it was pretty cool. But I would say, take a look at that, the New Pauline perspective. It's some of the top Bible scholarship. It's fascinating, and it's really neat that they're so on the edge of that. But I want to say, is Paul a blasphemer? No, I absolutely do not think so, and I know that you don't either, except for Nathan. Now, where did this charge come from? It came from the unbelieving Jews who have listened to the rumors, listened to the gossip regarding Paul. When he gets to Jerusalem in Acts 21, you're going to see them say the same thing. We've heard about you that you're doing A, B, and C. Go out and do this and prove that they are not correct. It's stated right there. So, something to keep in mind. Now, here's something. We don't even know what blasphemy is. A Jew will tell you, well, if you pronounce the name, the unspeakable name of God, Yehovah, you'll be stoned. And this is literally where they got that comedy skit in Monty Python's Life of Brian, where this high priest is being stoned to death because he's like, I don't know if you guys seen the Life of Brian. I'm not a huge fan of Monty Python. Yeah, it's a little dry, but my kids were like, we've been hearing about Monty Python. Yeah, should we watch Monty Python? I said, I don't think so, dude. But I did find the clip on YouTube where the Sanhedrin was actually being stoned on accident because they were bringing charges against the guy and actually accidentally said the name of Yehovah while pronouncing the verdict, and they started being stoned to death by the crowd. It was pretty funny. But you can't really clearly identify what blasphemy is. It's not identified in your Bibles, and it's full of weird stuff. You can look at Leviticus 24:10 to discuss. There's a little discussion of blasphemy there, but we don't even know what it is. You ever heard of Salman Rushdie?
Yeah.
Who remembers what Salman Rushdie is? Yes, it's the guy who wrote the book called The Satanic Verses. He was an ex-Muslim who wrote a book about the evils of Islam and published it in the West. And the Islamic people put a fatwa out on him to assassinate him, and he was in hiding and rushing around trying to save his own life. They declared that he was a blasphemer and put a bounty on his head. And so Paul is Salman Rushdie, although he didn't actually do anything.
Another thing, if blasphemy's not explained, the Bible says, if you work on the Sabbath, you're in trouble. Never defines work.
Well,
It never
there are
tells you this is work and this is not work.
Yeah, well, they have a very keen insight into that, which I find fascinating. I don't know if I thoroughly believe it, but it's very interesting.
From your own interests.
Yeah, I think that's key. Mikey?
Is the blasphemed in Hebrew, is that the word nakab?
Nakab, yes.
So it's kind of interesting what the letter picture is, right? It's life behind the house.
Life behind the house. Now, how would you assign meaning to that?
You're not in the house. Right?
That's interesting.
You're living that life outside the house.
Interesting. Yeah. That's good insight. Darren?
It'd be interesting to know because it said there's one unforgivable sin.
Blasphemy of the Holy Spirit.
Man.
I know, and you can, Christian commentators fry themselves in pretzels trying to figure out what that means. Nobody knows what it means to blaspheme the Holy Spirit. I can come up with 100 ideas that I think sound good, but I couldn't say definitively.
I'm just noting, I cheated and looked ahead at you said that, what Jews and why they were getting in trouble.
Yes.
It doesn't have to do with Jesus.
No, not really.
It doesn't have to do with Jesus at all. It doesn't even have to do with anything Messianic.
I
It has
know.
to do with circumcision.
Circumcision and Torah and the tradition of the elders.
And he had Timothy get circumcised.
That's right.
So
Trippy stuff, huh, Angela?
It kind of does have something to do with Jesus because Jesus is doing the same thing, trying to strip away their extra rules.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and Paul's doing they killed him for the same reason I think they're trying to kill Paul, but it's not about.
But circumcision, Jesus said flat out, you are teaching the doctrines of God, the commandments of men. We see good examples of that. Picking up your mat on the Sabbath was against their rule, but it's not against anything in the Torah.
Right.
Healing someone on the Sabbath is not against the Torah.
Right.
But not circumcising your children is in the Torah.
But I don't know that Paul ever actually said
He said if you get circumcised, you're counting Jesus' sacrifice as nothing.
Is
right?
he
You might as
talking
well
about
do the whole
physical circumcision, or is he talking about converting to Judaism?
thing. I mean, I think
Because
he's
that's-
talking about literal. I think he's talking about literal circumcision.
I don't think he is. And I think that we've talked about that in the beginning of this book, that circumcision in this book especially is a code word for conversion to Judaism. And so he's saying, if you get physically circumcised, I don't think he's talking about physical circumcision. I think he's saying, if you convert to Judaism and take on all of the stuff that they have, then Christ will have died for nothing, right? Isn't that the words that he uses?
Cheating and going ahead, these Jews in Acts 21:21, they have issue with what he is saying to the Jews.
Yeah, but he didn't actually say those things. I don't think he actually said those things. Well, that's the guy who's with him says, do this, and they will know that what they have heard about you is not true. Paul doesn't say, well, okay, well, we have a problem here because what they're saying about me is true. Well, he never said that. He followed their instructions and did exactly what they said in order to demonstrate that the rumors about him were not true. So I don't see a problem there, but let's just dig a little bit further. Blasphemy and who can be guilty of it, we're not exactly sure, but here... What did I do? Sorry. So here's the challenging issue. What are our views on theocracy, and how do they mesh with our views on the kingdom of God? Would you guys like to live, bless you, in a theocracy?
Yes.
Are you sure about that?
Depends on who's.
Depends on who's what.
Messiah's theocracy would be fun.
That's true. Okay.
My theocracy would be rough.
Yes, a theocracy of Jimmy would be rough. Now, I was talking with Kent actually about this kind of a thing this week. We were exchanging some ideas through email regarding the Noahide laws. And that's kind of one of the fears that people have, is somebody setting up a theocracy that's not good. And some people have anticipated that the anti-Messianic kingdom will be set up on some type of a converted or a perverted theocracy. I know you have. Now, here's the key question. How do we feel about a theocracy? Well, in America, a theocracy is anathema. It's a curse to Americans and Western culture in general. Nobody in America or Western Europe or anywhere where we consider ourselves civilized want to have anything to do with a theocracy. And here's something that most people don't consider, or they just don't know. Most Christians, believe it or not, I don't know why this is, seem to believe that you die and you get raptured and you go to heaven and you stay in heaven for eternity. That's simply not the case. That's not what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches that Yeshua is going to come and set up a theocracy. And you know what else? He's going to kill his enemies. Tons of them. And there is going to be a lot of death and a lot of destruction. You know what's going to be the rule of the land? The Torah. Does the Torah require death penalty? It most assuredly does. So there's going to be a lot of death. You can read the book of Revelation. And flogging. Yeah, I love flogging. So there's going to be, if you've read the book of the Revelation, it's funny that I was talking to Angela about that the other day. And she said, well, maybe that's why these 100-pound stone weights of hailstones are falling from the sky in the book of Revelation. God himself is stoning people. I thought, oh my gosh. So seriously, we have to kind of adjust our thinking and decide for ourselves, are you going to live under the Torah and the Messiah, Yeshua, who's going to be ruling with the Torah going out from the city of Jerusalem? Well, you're all going to be living under it. Are you ready for that?
No, I think most people
That's very true.
We'll protest, but we're going to protest. And I'm sorry, but this whole night, it just has Monty Python written on it. I don't know if you guys have seen that clip. What? Monty Python. What?
The life of Brian.
No way.
All right, sorry.
The life of Brian.
Nathan, let's all listen to Nathan Briscoe. He has something deep and powerful to say.
Everybody's listening.
Every time. Well, I was just going to say that, I mean, when you look at theocracy, you can look at like the Islamic theocracy, which is one that is lorded over people, and you basically, it's like a religion of conquest where they're forcing their theocracy, whereas the Jewish theocracy is one that's volunteered.
Okay.
And you can see, even though when Jesus is ruling on the throne in Jerusalem, there are nations that are not submitting to him, and then they wage war with him. So even when he's there, so the Jews, it wasn't like, hey, everybody's got to follow our rules.
Right.
It's like, if you don't want to follow our rules, get out of Dodge.
Sure. And I think, hold on, go ahead.
When I was growing up, I don't know if I'm the only one who had this impression for the longest time, was that once it was the kingdom in heaven or on earth or wherever it's going to be, I don't think I even gave that a second thought, that we're all just going to naturally want to do good, and we're never going to want to do bad, and we're never going to do bad. We're just going to be magically good.
Oh, man.
I don't think that anymore. I'm a little worried about that part.
Well, let me just point this out, because I was having another discussion with Johan about Islamic law versus Torah law. And that, unfortunately, you guys, there's a lot of similarities. And people hate it when I say that. My wife always kicks me. She's kicking me psychically right now. You don't say that. You do not talk about the similarities between the ruthlessness of Islam and the Torah law. Well, I got to tell you, there are some similarities there. There really are. I'm sorry to tell you. But here's the thing that you want to remember. The thing about Islam is they have no problem and are commanded to kill infidels. They are commanded to kill unbelievers. You will only one time in the Bible will you find unbelievers. You're instructed to kill unbelievers. Who are those people?
Canaanites.
The Canaanites. That is the only group in the Bible that God said kill them. Kill them all. Don't let a single one of them live. Anybody who lived outside of the land of Canaan, you can make a treaty with them, you can trade with them, that's fine. But these people in this land must die. I don't know why. There's lots of speculation. There's tons of very interesting speculation. But I'm not here to cover that. What I am here to talk about is there are some similarities. But whereas Islam says kill the unbelievers, we don't kill unbelievers. We're supposed to be a light to the unbelievers. Now, that's not to say that we haven't. The Jews, in their history, have never done it. As far as not in the Bible, not in any of the extra-biblical histories that I have found, only in regards to the Canaanites. Christians, yes. There have been, unfortunately, many occasions where we have killed in the name of our Messiah, saying, convert or die. We did what Islam does. The Catholic Church did it during the Inquisition. They had religious wars between the Catholics and the Protestants. They killed thousands and thousands of Jews. But the issue is, with Islam, kill the infidels. With Torah, no. But are we instructed to kill in the Torah? Yes, to police our own, who are guilty of blasphemy, infidelity, leading people astray after false gods or false teachings. So these people are thinking that they're doing the right thing. And that's the problem with today's theology, is that a lot of Christians want to try to make excuses for the Bible's death. That is one thing that people who are unbelievers look at our Bible and they say, your God is horrible. Your God is mean and nasty, because he instructed the Israelites to kill the Canaanites.
Men, women, and children.
Men, women, children, and animals. All of them. Keith?
Yeah, so in that idea of Judaism or even the Torah, there's no need for jails. There's no need for...
There you go.
For
flogging.
Yeah, I mean, if you get punished, and if you get punished and the punish isn't death, then you walk away knowing your punishment's been paid and you continue on. But if you did something so severe that the punishment is death, they're not going to have to deal with you anymore. You're done. They
That's
don't
right.
have a place where they punish people by keeping them in prison. They don't.
That's right.
They didn't have. It was the Romans that did all that.
The Romans didn't even do it.
Right.
I don't know if you were here for that first or second lesson in the book of Acts, but prisons where you actually put someone in there to just hold them, that didn't happen until like the later Middle Ages.
But then that was until the judgment, and then you were killed. And
Yeah,
then
a prison in those days was only a holding cell for the death penalty or a trial, and it usually was only a short period of time. Angela?
I just heard someone say recently, I don't know if this was in a movie or I don't know who said this, but in relation to the death penalty, they said, let me see if I can get this right. The death penalty is deterrent not because of the possibility of being killed for the crime, but the surety.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. I agree with that statement.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
We don't have that anymore.
No, we don't. And we have prisons full of people.
Before you'll actually get to.
Yeah. I know, that's crazy. Well, so I just wanted to speak with you briefly regarding, that was real brief. I apologize for the long-windedness of that, but there's a lot of questions about this blasphemy stuff and what is the kingdom and how does this all work with Paul and them trying to kill him. It's quite fascinating. But I'm going to move forward just a little bit. So remember that Nathan was talking about this a second ago where Paul was trying to get to Jerusalem for the Feast of Pentecost, but he skipped the unleavened bread. Is that a violation of the Torah?
Well, he doesn't skip it. He says he's staying somewhere during it.
Yeah, he's staying somewhere else.
He's
supposed to be in the city of Jerusalem for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Is that okay?
No, you blew it.
No, it is okay.
You can have the diaspora.
I was gonna say it's probably not okay, but like I don't recall any punishment.
It's actually in the Torah it talks about two reasons why you would not have to be in Jerusalem for the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and one is for ritual defilement or if you're on a long journey.
Oh, I didn't know about the journey thing.
Yeah. I thought that it said long journey, and then I looked it up, and sure enough, it said long journey. So if you are on a long journey or if you are ritually unclean, that is why we have a second Passover. And so he's on a long journey. And think about this too. I would consider Paul to be like he himself talks about, like in the Kingdom of Priest passage, that he is functioning as the role of a spiritual priest, doing the work of a priest out in the nations. And so just like Yeshua, when they said, oh, you're not allowed to pick up your mat, he said, hey, the guys in the temple are doing their work. They're not. They are doing work in the temple. They're not guilty. They're doing the Lord's work. I would suggest to you that Paul is out among the nations doing the Lord's work in the function of a spiritual high priest. So that negates him having to stop working, A. And then second, he's on a long journey. And if you want to go back to the whole issue about ritual defilement in chapter 10, he might be ritually undefiled too and can't go into the temple compound.
What is the Torah reference for the...
I am so sorry that I put that in my notes on my paper, but it did not make it into this PowerPoint presentation. I'll try to update that before I put it in, but let me... this is when they were actually getting ready to celebrate the Feast of Unleavened Bread for the second time in the book of... I want to say that it was Joshua when they were actually... No, it was Moses. It was Moses. I apologize. It's in the wilderness. I think it's in the book of Numbers where they're like 9:10. Numbers 9:10. I think that's it. Where they were like, hey, man, why can't we celebrate the Passover? I think it's because they were carrying the bones of Joseph out of the land that they were required to take with them. At least that's the traditional interpretation of the rabbis, is that they were carrying the bones of Joseph and couldn't do the Passover, and so that's when they instituted the second Passover. So if you find that passage where they institute the second Passover, that's where it is. So he's okay. That's why... Oh, there it is. Duh. Numbers 9:9. I apologize. That's why Paul didn't make his way to Jerusalem for the Passover matzah thing, is because this was not a violation. Now, yes, sir.
Was he ritually defiled because he just touched a corpse, right?
Well, that's a good point too. He had just touched the dead body of this kid, and he's interacting with a bunch of Gentiles, and so for him to be out in the world and interacting with a bunch of Gentiles, and then showing up at the temple trying to go in, they would have like, "Whoa, dude, you were sprinkling with the water of the red heifer, and you got to go through these things before you can enter there." So yeah, I think that's possibly what it is. And notice also in Acts chapter 21, verse 21, that's part of what he does when he gets there, is part of taking part in this ritual of and paying the way of these men who were fulfilling a vow. That's probably part of his ritual cleansing that he thought would be appropriate because he's interacting with the Jews in the city of Jerusalem, and he's been out in the world, who knows, interacting with what and becoming ritually unclean. Somebody else want to have a hand raised? No? Okay. Oh, Derek.
I just wanted to say earlier, I stand corrected. The punishment is getting cut off from the people.
The punishment is what?
Getting cut off from the people.
Oh, for what?
For not going to honoring Passover.
Oh, right. Gotcha. So it says in verse 7 that it was Motzei Shabbat. Now, that is not what your passage says, I'm sure, unless you're reading from a similar Bible. But the Motzei Shabbat, what is that translated as in your Bible in verse 7? The first of the week. Yes, and literally, you've probably seen this many times before when in your early days of Messianic Hebrew roots stuff, where it's basically Mia Sabbaton on 1 of 7. And I know that you're probably aware of this, but that's how Jews count days. They don't count their days Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. They say 1 of 7, 2 of 7, 3 of 7. So, this is the big question. What is Motzei Shabbat? That is not what it says in the translation. In this translation, that's what it says, but not in the literal translation. It's actually 1 of the 7. Now, in this translation, they put Motzei Shabbat, which is not, again, an accurate translation, but it is giving you an idea to explain what's going on here. Mikey?
Could it also be the first Sabbath, that now it's counting 7?
I believe it's possible, yeah. Yep, I do. I do believe that that's possible, that this is... Huh? The first, yes. Well, remember that Sabbath means 7, and that's how they refer to the week. So, yes, in the text, in the Greek, it literally says Mia Sabbaton in 1 of 7. And I think Mike is pointing out, which I tend to agree with and think it's very interesting, that it's possible that this was the week 1 count of 7 to leading up to the 50th day, which is Shavuot. And it's a reference to that, and not necessarily a reference to the first day of the week. However, when we'll deal with that in just a sec, because when this guy in this translation that I'm using, which is the complete Jewish Bible, it says when Motzei Shabbat arrived, and Motzei Shabbat means the going out of the Sabbath. And I think he put that in there to help you potentially understand what was going on here, which I think is fine, but it's not an accurate translation. Have you ever heard of a Havdalah service?
Yeah.
What is that?
The ending of the
Yes, it's a ritual that they partake of in order to send out the Sabbath. Like they can't begin cooking a meal or engaging in commerce or going shopping or going out to dinner. And if you guys have been to Israel, you've probably seen this, where as soon as the sun goes down on Shabbat, it's like the store shops open up and you start smelling things cooking and people are going out and moving and grooving. You know, it's time to move and groove because the Sabbath is over.
I've always been a bit confused about the Sabbath day and fellowship. I think it says somewhere in the Torah that each should stay in his own place. And yet I hear people talking about getting together on the Sabbath.
Sure.
The synagogue on the Sabbath.
Sure. That's a great question. That's a great question, Nathan. I'll deal with that in a moment. What I want to point out first, though, is that like Carla said, the Havdalah service is just a ritual that is not biblically commanded, that is just a tradition in Judaism, to light some candles and say some prayers, that basically ritually observes the transition from one day to the next. Now that the sun has gone down on Saturday night, it is now, according to the Jewish reckoning of time, Sunday. It is Sunday now that the sun has gone down on Saturday night. So, Saturday night rolls around, They're transitioning out of the Sabbath into the first day of the week. They do this Motzei Shabbat ceremony. They break bread, and they begin to continue their Sabbath fellowship into the wee hours of the night. And Paul stays up all night long teaching until midnight, about which time this kid falls asleep and falls out of the window. They pick him up, bring him back inside, and Paul continues teaching until the sun comes up, which would be Sunday morning. Now, this passage right here has had a tremendous impact on the church. A tremendous impact on the church. Now, some people think that it is because of this passage that Christian worship was changed to Sunday. That's not exactly true. It is the passage that is most often used by Christians to say that Sabbath was like relocated to Sunday. That's the only passage that they could use because it's the only passage in the New Testament that actually talks about the disciples getting together on a Sunday. Now, I gotta point out to you here that this is not a case for Sunday worship because it's not taking place on a Sunday that we're used to anyway. It's still on Saturday.
Huh? Have Sunday.
Well, no,
the first day of the week.
Yeah, it's the first day of the week, but it is the day of the sun, yeah. Because the Mithraites were already worshiping on that day, which they are sun worshipers. So when Constantine in 329 at the Council of Nicaea was looking to basically abolish Judaism and strictly separate Judaism, he did not necessarily straight up transfer the day of worship to Sunday. He basically abolished observing the Sabbath for Christians and said, we will now meet on the first day of the week. Which was convenient for everybody because the sun worshipers were already worshiping on that day. Everybody will just make that the day of worship for all the religions, which is good. And he just canceled and terminated Sabbath keeping for Christians. That's Jewish stuff. So this is not really a good case that's being made here for a traditional Sunday worship service. Now, here's the key consideration. Is there a problem with worshiping on Sunday? No. Not at all. Is there a problem with worshiping on Sabbath day? If you going back to what Nathan was talking about.
From what I'm saying, there's no problem here. They're getting together on the first day of the week.
Sure.
It says it's a worship service.
I mean, unless you want to consider, a person teaching a worship service, but here's the key point that I would make, and that is the Bible does not ever dictate a day of worship. The Sabbath was not a day of worship. It was never commanded. Now, there are some who have interpreted that there are places in the Torah where it talks about the Sabbath and a convocation. Now, that can be interpreted variously as a reading or a gathering. Now, what does that mean? That is commanded to read your Torah? Read the Bible on the Sabbath day? Well, sure. That's a good interpretation. And it's not for no reason, I think, that the Jews gathered on Shabbat, is because you could interpret that holy convocation to be happening that way. But I think that holy convocation passage is most often referring to the high Shabbats that are part of a feast day service, not necessarily the weekly Shabbat. You'll have to check into that for me and let me know.
Verse 23:3, 6 days shall your work be done, and the seventh day is the Sabbath of rest, holy convocation.
Okay, there you go. So it is related to the Sabbath day, related to a holy convocation, and it's not always related to a high Sabbath. Now, here's the question, though. What is a holy convocation? Well, a convocation can be a reading or a gathering of people, and so that is why the Jews gather on Shabbat. And if you want to gather on Shabbat, that's obviously why. And they have these restrictions regarding how far you should travel, because you're not supposed to do work. But they consider traveling work. You know how they are with creating a bunch of weird stuff.
But each should stay in his own place. I'm sure it comes from that.
Yeah. Now, let me ask the group here does anyone have an idea about what Nathan is talking about when God said, stay in your house?
Can we get a scripture reference?
Well, I don't know if it says stay in your house.
No, it says let each person stay in his place. Stay in your place. Now, I personally think...
I think it's when the guys taking the sticks?
No, it wasn't the sticks. It was the people going out and looking for manna when he told them there wasn't going to be any on the seventh day. And I think that that's the key consideration. What's that, Carla?
Is that the only place?
That's the only place that is ever said, yes.
It says, I think it's Exodus 16. And this is the gathering of the manna situation.
Yeah.
This was before the Torah was officially given.
Yep.
I think this is, there's a chance, a possibility, should I say, that this is in reference to him just speaking to them at that time. Not necessarily this is Torah, because the Torah hasn't been given yet.
Yeah,
So
I think that's a good point. And I personally think that it is specific to those circumstances because they had just been warned twice that there was not going to be any manna on the seventh day. And they were rebelling and going outside looking for manna. And that's why he said, it's kind of like a dad being a little bit emphatic. It's like, just go to your home and stay there. Go to your room. I personally feel like that's what it is, that God was being emphatic. And I think it's a good point that Tracy makes, that the Torah hadn't even been given yet. So I don't think it's reasonable to assume that on Shabbat you are supposed to stay in your house.
Well, we know Jesus didn't.
No, exactly.
So I don't interpret it like
No, but some do. But not even Jews interpret it as stay in your house. The only people that I've ever heard of who stay in their house are Messianics who have misinterpreted the passages.
Or this is one of those things that, people who don't think you should keep the law will throw in your face and say, well, you're not staying in your house kind of thing. But it's because of misunderstanding.
That makes sense.
I think it makes perfect sense for what you said. It's because right before he says that, he says, how long, this is Yahovah speaking, how long we refuse to keep my commandments and my Torah?
Right.
I told you, this is when you're going to get it. This is when I'm giving it to you.
Yep.
Why are you out here now?
Yeah, I think that's what it is. Mikey.
It does have some kind of interesting verbiage in Leviticus 23. Because
Well,
hey, you should hear this too.
I don't think she heard that either, Mikey.
I said the verbiage in Leviticus 23:3 is interesting when it's listing out all the feast days. The Sabbath is the first one.
Yeah.
And it says that it's a Sabbath of the Lord in all your dwellings.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the only one of the days listed with dwellings. So I don't know why.
Sure.
Signify.
Now, and I think that's very interesting. And I would say to you that my own practice, any of you who know me, is I don't leave my house on Shabbat. I just don't. It's not because I think that's the right thing to do, and I'm not telling you that it's the right thing to do. I just don't.
Make us come here, Alan.
Yeah, you made this.
Yeah. No, I'm talking about.
They didn't use their donkeys. They didn't use their donkeys on Shabbat.
Yeah, I'm making you come here. Sorry. Okay, sorry. Hold on a second. Angela, I was going to call on you, but I just remembered that Darren and Mr. Stewart.
What's his name?
Mr. Stewart had his hand raised.
Okay, before you move from this verse, I have something to say about it.
Before I move from the...
Question about that verse.
Oh, okay.
Not the other stuff.
I got you. Okay, hold that thought. Darren.
I was just going to add that between the 14th and 16th century in Spain, the Jews would actually gather all the things, they put lion barricades, so all of it was one dwelling.
Yes. They still do that in America.
Even they took it literal for a long time, at least 6 of them did.
Sure. And you, Jimmy.
Cool thing in the legends of the Jews that talks about gathering manna on the Sabbath, that it smelled like a dead body, the worms did. And the worms would tell them because they would go straight to your neighbors' houses and go and affect their houses too. And so you had all of these lines of worms aiming at your house, like, and everybody knew you had been the one that screwed that neighbor over.
I love those legends.
That's funny. Angela, cheer up, sister.
In this verse, I know you got off on the first day of the week thing, but I was looking at the Greek thing, and it just has one, and it has Sabbaton.
Yes.
And it's happening after the days of 11 days. So could this not be the first Sabbath, like in the counting of the Omer?
That's what Mike said a minute ago.
Oh, okay. I was out.
You need to hear this too. Okay, sorry. Moving forward. So, next issue with chapter 7 or verse 7 is, are we having communion? Are we breaking bread? This is where the Catholic Church invented communion, Christian communion. We're breaking bread.
Uh-oh.
Is this communion?
Well, I mean, Jesus said, come together, fellowship with each other, and every time, whenever you do come together, do this in remembrance of me. So, I mean, every time they got together was communion. That's what communion means anyway, is being together.
I think Catholics just ritualized it. That's all.
Well, I know that on the first, whenever after the days of unleavened bread, when we can finally eat leaven again, Lord, we really enjoy that day, and they're breaking bread. They're enjoying.
Well, you got to remember too that every time Jews get together to fellowship, they break bread, because that's part of the. You've heard the ceremony that is beginning for every meal, right? The blessing over the bread. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen, and then borei pri min haaretz. This is what they're doing. They're breaking bread every time. You know that it's considered, in those days, and if you've read Alfred Edersheim's sketches of Jewish social life in the first century, it's fascinating stuff. They consider it to be a really bad faux pas that would never be done. You never cut bread with a knife. Never, ever, ever do you cut bread with a knife. You break bread with your hands. That is literally, because there's so much symbolism in the bread. If you take a knife to the bread, it's like killing life. So they break bread with their hands. They never use a knife on it. So breaking bread it's part of the part of the eating ceremony. It doesn't have anything to do with communion. What's that?
Doesn't it also breaking bread just means eating together?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
So
there's some people just think, no, the bread, the matzah, only, or the loaves.
No, it's every single time that you're fellowshipping together. I mean,
there could be no bread present, and you're breaking bread because you're.
Yeah, you could use it that way correctly. Absolutely, breaking bread is a euphemism for just eating together in a lot of cases, but it's also literal in that there's this breaking of the bread ceremony that happens before every meal. So I think that you can look at it either way. Regardless, it's not a communion service, and communion is not in the Bible. And I personally have a different take on that, that passage regarding, when you do this in remembrance of me. When you do what? When you observe the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Yeah. When you observe the Passover. I think that communion is a ripoff of Passover, and that it was separated from the Jewish feast so that Christians could still observe a kind of Passover without having anything to do with Jews. And that the Catholic Church instituted that.
Use sun-disk wafers.
Uh-oh.
Those things are awesome, too.
Sun-disk wafers.
Well, it's a Catholic tradition. It's bound to be some.
It's bound to have some paganism in it.
Mixing with some pagan.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Keith, tell us about it, brother.
Well, I know they say something that sounds like abracadabra, and then they turn it into flesh. So.
Hocus pocus. Hocus pocus. Comes from it.
That's right.
It comes from it.
Okay, so here's just a brief thing, and then I'm going to wrap up for the night. This dude was dead, right? Now, was Eutychus dead, or was he just stunned, or was this like a resurrection? Or was this dude not really dead?
I think it was a resurrection.
Does anyone think that he was not really dead? He was just stunned or something, and Paul picked him up and said, "Oh, it's okay, man, he's all right."
If you want to not believe in miracles.
He was a doctor.
What?
There you go. There you go. Ding, ding, ding. She's the winner of the prize. Our beloved physician Luke wrote this book. He's not much of a physician if he can't tell when someone's dead. Right? So if he says the guy was dead, then the guy was dead. I assume he knows how to tell what a dead body is. Yeah. So I think that this is Paul resurrecting this kid from the dead.
Was it Ezekiel that laid down the body of
Yeah. No, that was Elijah. Elisha, excuse me. So yeah, Eutychus was dead, and our beloved physician, he's not much of a physician if he can't tell a dead body. Any other comments, questions, or concerns?